The Big Swig Roller. Is this weapon truly the trash the community says it is? Or is it a hidden treasure, whose potential we are overlooking due to how differently it plays from all the other rollers? To find out, I picked up this roller and mained it for a whole week, getting it from 0 freshness all the way to 4 stars, making myself one of the few people who could suffer with it for long enough to get its badge and determine its true value. To find out if this weapon is trash or treasure, I will tell you about all of the different experiences I had with it throughout the week, and give it trash or treasure points depending on how it performed. Kind of like a turf war, except instead of painting, the points will come from how well it does in-game. Before getting into the deep of it, let's quickly cover what exactly this roller does, where it belongs in the roller family tree, and what are its strengths. Let's begin with the horizontal flicks. The Big Swig has the same flinging speed as the Flingza roller, but only does half the damage, making it a 2-hit splat at close range and a 4-hit splat from further away. The Big Swig has the widest horizontal flick spread among all of the rollers. The Dynamo does outrange it, but it does not outwide it. The other thing to note about this thing's horizontal attacks is that it was much easier to aim them and hit targets with it at range. Sadly, it is a 4-hit kill at range, so that good aim ain't as useful as you'd think. For vertical flicks, its range is between that of the vanilla roller and the Flingza. Its speed is a bit slower than the Carbon's, and that's a problem, because unlike the Carbon, which can one-shot with both horizontal and vertical at close range, the Big Swig can only one-shot with a vertical. It technically can one-shot from a bit further back though. This means that the Big Swig is the worst roller to use if you want to splat enemies by yourself, and considering how important that is in this game, this major weakness gives it some major trash points. Where this roller shines is actually with its rolling, because it has a wide spread, second only to the Dynamo, but it can roll faster than the Flingza, 5% faster. This puts its rolling speed right between that of the Carbon and the vanilla rollers. Sadly, this speed comes at the cost of damage. Rolling over an enemy does the same as if you were rolling over them with a Carbon. It does not one-shot. However, this weapon can keep rolling for much longer than any other roller. I'm talking 15 seconds longer. That's a lot of seconds. It's almost double the amount of rolling time. However, this ink efficiency is only for rolling. When it comes to flicks, you can only get about 10 attacks per ink tank, roughly the same as the vanilla roller. Thanks to this quick and efficient rolling, the Big Swig is a major painting weapon. Its horizontal flick covers a bunch of turf super fast. So for its good inking ability, I have to give the Big Swig some treasure points. Now that we have a general idea of how this weapon works, let's look at how it performed in practice. Part 1. Turf Wars. Seeing as the Big Swig is more of an inking and support weapon, you'd expect it to do really well in Turf Wars, where the main objective is to paint. And well, I have to give it credit where credit is due. Using this weapon to paint feels absolutely amazing. It was really hard going back to the normal roller after using this for a week. The vanilla feels so slow and clunky to paint with in comparison. The swings of the Big Swig felt smooth, and anything I looked at was instantly covered in my ink. Although this weapon is amazing at the turf part, its damage output is so poor that the Inkling government needs to send me some MPU stamps if I want to make ends meet. The unfortunate part is that when it comes to facing off against enemy cephalopods, I would lose the confrontation 90% of the time. Well, when I tried to face them head on. I was a lot more successful when I tried a sneaky approach or hung back until my teammates showed up and acted as the distraction or support while they got the splat. That's when I realized something very important. The more open the map, the more this weapon is... Part 2. Tower Control. Using rollers on tower is usually pretty fun, since you can just hop on the tower, do a little roll, and anyone who's trying to stand on it gets squished. But not with this bad boy, since Big Swig can't one-shot with a roll, and has an extremely short range when it comes to splatting opponents, it's not a good weapon for keeping enemies off the tower, which is a problem because you can't control the tower if you can't keep your enemies off of it. The Ink Vac sort of helps balance things out a bit, since you can use it to suck up incoming attacks while waiting to push through a checkpoint, but this strategy falls flat on its face when there's 2 or more ways for the enemy team to approach the tower, which is on most maps. My other thought was to use the horizontal swings to keep enemies away, but since they do so little damage, this strategy felt like trying to hit a toadstool with mud slap. Not very effective. If the Big Swig had more damage on those horizontals, the story would be very different. Just look at the Dynamo. This thing sparks fear. This does not. Tower control is definitely the Big Swig's worst mode, so regardless of the final verdict, I would say just don't use this in tower control ever. Part 3. Clam Blitz. It's very hard to stop the enemy team from scoring on you when you can't really splat anyone. As a support weapon, you'd think that staying back and acting as the goalie might be a good way to go in this mode, but you should leave that job to the real backline weapons. If all you're doing is keeping the area near the choke points painted while the enemies try to push in, you're doing more harm than good, because you're helping them charge their specials right before the major push, and then even your teammates can't do much to stop them. With its paint output, the Big Swig was pretty good at covering the critical areas where the clams spawn, and it also has pretty good mobility, so it made collecting clams and approaching the enemy basket a very smooth and easy process. But, and this is a big but, it was very hard to make an actual push with this weapon since again, it's not good at killing at all. If I could sneak my way in and score a power clam, I could use my sub and special to help my teammates score, but if I had to be the one making the push against the backline, Part 4, Rainmaker. So far, the Big Swig was a big letdown, but this is where things started to turn around. Although this weapon didn't have huge killing potential, its inking ability is absolutely amazing, and that made it a pretty good weapon for Rainmaker. It's hard for the enemy to make a push when you can cover up their paths very quickly, and it's easy for your team to push when you can paint a path for them and support them with your good sub and special. I got several amazing wins thanks to this weapon, and that made me confident enough to do my rank up matches with it, and I won! I can't believe I actually managed to rank up with the Big Swig. Although I cannot give full credit to the weapon itself, there were so many times where I just failed to splat opponents at crucial moments. A lot of winning moves came purely from the sub special and confused enemies who weren't looking at me during the match. Not sure if they were just focused on something else or knew how bad this weapon is and simply underestimated it. Either way, I was on a win streak and starting to like this thing. Part 5, Splat Zones. This is supposed to be the best mode for the Big Swig since it can literally cover the entire zone on some maps with just one swing. Keyword, some maps. If you try to use this on a large zone with a huge open area like Eeltail Alley, you're gonna have a bad time. But on maps like Undertow, you are king. As long as your teammates can splat the enemies, you are a painter, not a splatter. Overall, I ended up winning most of my Splat Zones matches with a knockout, but once my scores came in, I realized that there was a huge problem with the Big Swig. I was consistently getting only silver medals. This is a huge problem because as a defenseless support weapon, you can't really stack up a bunch of golds. There is a trade-off between staying back to hold zone and pushing forward to get within range to splat an incoming enemy. The problem with staying back is that it's super easy for enemies to rush in or outrange you once they get into good position on their side. So if you aren't proactive, you'll get splatted. But if you do get proactive and go for the kills, that leaves you exposed to their teammates' fire and you're defenseless again. I tried both ways and honestly, we were winning a lot more when I got aggressive about defending the zones from incoming attackers. But the price I paid was getting these silvers. Why are silvers bad? Because at the end of the day, the points I earned for playing through 6 series matches were barely more than the points I had to pay to play them. If I had done slightly worse, I would have been on track to rank down, and that was the final nail in the coffin. As much as it pains me to admit it, the Big Swig roller is big time garbo, at least for now. I made this video shortly after the weapon came out and the developers have yet to give us any balancing patches or different kits, so maybe it's better in the future when you're watching this, but for now, it's garbo. Despite the fact that it feels amazing to paint with this weapon and it can get some great splats with it sometimes, its damage output is so bad that you're literally throwing by using it instead of any other roller. However, I can see the potential in this one and it really comes down to what we get in future updates. Here are some ways that the developers could turn this weapon from trash to treasure. They could increase the efficiency of flicks. Even though this roller can roll for about 30 seconds straight, double the time of basically all the other rollers, it can only flick 10 times. The splat roller gets 11 and the carbon, which has the same short range for splats and more one-shot moves, can be flung 22 times. The Big Swig already has a rolling speed between the two, why not give it the ink efficiency between them as well? Considering how weak its attacks are, it's a shame that it can only use them half the time compared to a carbon. I realize the limit is there because of how much this thing can paint in one swing, but what's the point of painting a bunch if you can't protect yourself? I guess you could solve that swing issue by slapping on 20 points of main saver, and that's a pretty good ability for this exact shortcoming. I guess since you can solve this problem with something that's already in the game, it's not so much a problem, huh? Then how about we give this thing some damage buffs? Like maybe buff the horizontal flick damage so that it can 2 or 3 shot from a distance. This would make the horizontal flicks more more of a threat, especially in tower control and clan blitz. That way you can actually defend areas. At this moment, you have to hit 4 times to splat from a distance, but the dynamo can do the same thing in one swing. In terms of swing speed though, the Big Swig can get 2 horizontal flicks in the time the dynamo can get 1. So wouldn't it be fair for the Big Swig to do a tad more damage at a distance? Maybe not 2 shot, but at least 3. Okay, if you don't want to buff the horizontal flicks, how about increase the thickness of the vertical flick? Something I didn't mention at the start was that the Big Swig has the skinniest vertical flick of all the rollers, even skinnier than the Carbon, meaning you have to be super precise with your verticals to one-shot. Considering its horizontal can't one-shot at a close range, I think it's only fair to make the vertical line a bit more girthy than the Carbon rollers. That way we can have a more reliable method of splatting enemies at close range. The final buff that could make this weapon a lot better is a buff not to the weapon itself, but to an ability in the game. I'm looking at you, Thermo Ink. Since 9 times out of 10 you won't splat an enemy that you've hit directly, wouldn't it be nice if you had an ability that would mark those enemies so that your teammates could see them? Wouldn't this make a ton of sense to have for a weapon that's supposed to be team oriented, especially in solo matches where you can't communicate directly with your teammates? If Thermo Ink lets your allies see your marked enemies, the Big Swig could surely become an amazing support weapon, right? That's what I think anyways. What about you? Do you think the Big Swig is trash or treasure? Any tips on how to use it better? Or any ideas on how to make it good? Any other weapons you'd like to see me cover? Let me know in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and I hope to see you in the next one.